Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning on our webinar on planning reforms for onshore wind. We've got quite a lot of people we're expecting today, so we're just going to leave a couple of minutes to get everybody into the room. But feel free to use our chat or chat function to say hi and sort of introduce yourselves. Tell us how cold it is. It was less cold this morning, which was great. Or potentially how windy it is. And we'll start in 1 minute. Okay, I think numbers have started to tick down a bit now, so I'm going to kick off because we've only got an hour and we've got a lot to cover. So welcome everybody. My name's Poppy Morby. I'm the head of cities and regions at Regen. If you don't know who we are, we've put a quick slide up, which we are a not-for-profit centre of energy expertise. We want to see, we have a mission to transform the energy system for a net zero future. So we put together a session for you today with the objective of really helping and encouraging people, organisations, local authorities and communities to respond to a consultation. It's not all on onshore wind, and we'll go into a little bit of that later, but there is a crucial section within a wider government consultation at the moment that deals with onshore wind. And we have yesterday released a briefing paper, which we hope you'll find helpful in that objective, and we'll put a link in the chat for you, and we'll also send round to attendees of this event. So just to start us off, we know that onshore wind has sort of been all but banned in England since a change in planning rules in 2016. And you can see the impact of that in this next slide, where projects in England have basically disappeared, and then where Scotland and Wales have continued. And this consultation hints at a sort of small relaxation of the planning rules, which our session is going to explore in a bit more detail. And crucially, what we think we really need is a groundswell of responses to encourage government to go faster and further with these changes. We don't have a pipeline of sites like this infographic shows that are at the moment being frustrated by the current system, who can make their voices heard. That pipeline is essentially gone. The sector has died in England. So we need to build the sector from scratch again. And we know that in reality, there are ideas and plans out there. So we want to hear from you today, and we particularly want you to put those ideas and plans in your consultation responses. So why do we need to do this? The next slide gives us an inkling of this, but essentially onshore wind, one of the cheapest generation technologies we have, is critical to meeting net zero targets in England. So the lack of it both reduces our chances of meaningful climate action, but it also removes economic opportunities from communities and more widely in England. And we know that if done in the right way, these sites can bring huge benefits to communities. They're direct funding and wider benefits, which would be very welcome in this cost of living crisis, and helping areas take action on the climate emergency. So a quick run through of our agenda today. You're going to be hearing from Regen's Hazel Williams on some of the details of the consultation. Then we have two panel members who are going to give some of their views. We've got Catherine Tracy from Burge Salmon, and then we've got Duncan Law from Community Energy England. And then in the final half of the webinar, we're going to take questions for you from the panel, and they're going to be joined by Joseph, Duggan, and possibly also Jerome Marr from the Department for Levelling-up Housing and Communities, who will be mainly in listening mode, but they'll be answering some questions about process queries, etc. So some quick housekeeping before I hand over to Hazel. We've got a chat function, which I've already mentioned. So feel free to use that, put your thoughts and ideas in that. But questions that you want to ask in the second half of this session, there's two ways. We're in a meeting function today, so we'd love to hear your voices. So please at that Q&A session, please put your hand up and I shall ask. We're mainly going to have questions in the second half of this. But if you would like me to ask your question for whatever reason, then please put those in the Q&A. So I'll be scrolling through and I can also ask questions as well. We're also going to be asking you some questions over Menti today. So just a little bit of a warning to maybe have another screen or a phone available. We'll be asking a couple after we're asking one after the panel session and a few at the end. So I think that's everything I needed to cover. I will hand over now to Hazel.
Hi everyone, my name is Hazel Williams. I'm Associate Director at Regen. I have been working on planning and thinking about onshore wind for about 15 years. So I was quite excited when we saw that there was a consultation coming out looking at the planning rules around onshore wind. Just thinking this is great. And as you can see on this slide, what the consultation has to say about what it's trying to do is all really positive, recognising the importance of onshore winds in achieving net zero and talking about a more local and more flexible approach. It sounds great. Regen has really long championed that kind of effective community engagement, the importance of local ownership and importance of community benefits. We wrote the original guidance for BEIS back in 2014 about what good community engagement and community benefits look like from onshore winds. And that guidance was actually updated in 2021 and reissued at that point. So there is really good guidance out there. I think it was updated by CSE. We were kind of excited about what this consultation had to say. But what does it actually say? So next slide, please, Emma. When we start to get into the detail of what it says, and it's actually quite hard to find the linked document that it goes through to. So the original consultation is part of the Levelling-up Bill consultation, and then the specific wording changes are in another document, which is the kind of the updated NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework. And the reason we've copied it out is because, as ever with planning, the devil is in the detail. The specific wording makes a huge difference. So I'm not going to spend ages talking about the first 2 points. We've written this up into our consultation briefing note, which we put out yesterday. And it's there, it's available as a resource for you, and goes into into the real detail of what the changes are and what they say, as well as what evidence it might be useful for you as local authorities and as community organisations to put into your consultation responses. So that's there as a resource, and George will put the link in the chat so that you can have a look at that after the meeting. So there's 4 issues that I want to go into. First one, as I say, just quickly talking about repowering. So what it does on repowers, the first thing is just to name check repowers as something to consider as a local authority developing your local plan. You've got to have you should have a positive strategy for energy. And then they've added this name check of including thinking about repowers and maintenance. So this is broadly positive, but as ever, the word should means that local authorities that want to do something positive will do, and the others can broadly ignore it because it is not the word must. So then the second part on repowers is including this, this subpoint C under paragraph 160, which is talking about the adding a presumption in favour of approving repowers. So it's basically saying, if you get a repower application, so long as it's acceptable in planning, you should be looking to approve it. So it seems really good on the surface. We need those repowers. Our wind fleet is starting to age in England, and making planning straightforward is one less hurdle to making those repowers happen. But it does raise that question of, why should repowers be more acceptable than new onshore wind applications? Why should they be singled out for special treatment over new onshore wind applications? And if repowers are deemed to be widely acceptable, why does that not apply to all onshore wind applications? If local communities who have lived with wind are now broadly supportive, and I know that's not the case in every situation, but overall, broadly supportive communities having lived with onshore wind for a number of years, doesn't that mean that we should be making the same assumption about new planning applications, that local support for those sites would build once they're built, as we've seen in other locations? And then thinking about those that haven't had such a good experience, this addition changes the focus a little bit, saying that the way that repowers are considered should be from what's already on the site rather than thinking back to the baseline. So there's a kind of presumption that this could ride over those existing planning permissions which were granted on the basis that sites would be restored after 25 years. So there's a little bit, so overall looks positive, but could have some implications for our current and new sites that might not be so positive. Next slide, please. So again, I don't want to go into this in too much detail. It's a bit of an aside. It's talking about alternative routes to planning permission, and it's a bit of a red herring, I think. It's saying that there are alternative routes to apply for to get your site through planning that aren't straightforward applying for planning permission. These instruments, local development orders, neighbourhood development orders, and community right to build orders, are things that can be instigated by local authorities, neighbourhood forums, parish councils, and in the last case, community organisations. And they can grant permission in advance for a specific type of technology, in this case wind, in a specific location. But obviously to do that, there's a lot of upfront work involved. You need the resource, you need the skills, you have to undertake the same studies, you need to look at the environmental impacts, for example, of doing that. So very difficult for communities and local authorities to implement, and also quite unlikely to be quick or particularly viable route to doing it, because you still rightly require all that environmental assessment and engagement to do so. So what's the point? And I feel like this one is a bit of a red herring. So next slide, please. So getting to the crux of the matter, this is the wording change to footnote 54. So footnote 54, now 63, was the writing it into national policy of the written ministerial statement on wind. And it previously required wind to be in areas that had been allocated through a development plan, so that's a local plan or a neighbourhood plan, and for the impacts identified by the local community to have been fully addressed, and the proposal has their backing. So what's proposed are some tweaks to that wording. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the change to how local authorities can allocate areas for wind. So this adds the option of using supplementary planning documents as a way to allocate areas for wind. Supplementary planning documents don't go through the same planning process as development plan documents. They're not examined by the inspector, and as such, they can be a quicker, more flexible route to putting into place some policy, and in this case, to allocate areas for wind. But there's a lot of reasons why this doesn't particularly change anything for those looking to develop onshore wind. Overall, there's a lack of resource available in local authorities to allocate areas. We've seen research from Dr. Rebecca Windermere says that only 11% of authorities had allocated areas for wind to date, and only 15 had provided support on neighbourhood plans for onshore wind. So very low penetration so far of allocations. And as I said, lots of reasons for that. First one is definitely resources. The second reason why it's not such a great idea is that those areas that are allocated don't always match up with viable sites. So you've got things like grid capacity as being a major driver of where viable sites might be. It's very difficult for local authorities to really assess that and to come up with the right areas, as well as many other things they take into consideration. So you get this kind of disparity in between areas that are allocated and sites that are viable. And the third reason is that local authorities don't actually have to allocate areas. It's something that they can do. And so you find, as we've seen, not that many local authorities have gone through that process. It can be a contentious process. There's local politics at play, and so the vast majority have just avoided doing so. And then the fourth reason why this isn't such a great change in introducing the use of SPDs, of supplementary planning documents, is that elsewhere in the consultation, it mentions that SPDs are due to be withdrawn as a policy instrument, and that is from new SPDs can't be made from 2024, although the existing ones will be in place for a little while longer. But that kind of, we're adding a new route, a new option for flexible approach to allocating areas is very time limited. It's not a huge change. So next slide, please. And this is kind of the other crucial point in this consultation. So the wording changes, as I said, reduce the word fully addressed to satisfactorily addressed in terms of thinking about impacts, and changes the wording from must have their backing to community must, sorry, the proposal has community support. Get it exactly right. So there are real issues with this, and I was at a meeting yesterday with kind of wind developers, with researchers, with kind of the planning experts, and we were discussing, how could you demonstrate community support, and there was no consensus on any way to demonstrate that these tests have been met. The main message was that it's not a necessary test. That we talked about numbers of supporters, absence of objectors, having any supporters, but overall the feeling was that if you put this wording out there, it doesn't provide that certainty to investors, developers, local authorities that they need to understand whether or not an application has community support, and that it would fall to the planning courts to iron out the detail of whether or not that particular application had or hadn't met that test. So that the thing that we think is important is actually the need for effective engagement around new applications, and to do that properly, and that builds the acceptance for that application by responding to the community concerns and community wishes, and really working together to develop the application appropriately. And now that kind of engagement, as I said, is already set out through the best practice guidance and committed to by wind developers, and community groups are obviously excellent at doing that kind of engagement too. So the key question overall is why should there be this higher bar for onshore winds? There isn't this kind of footnote about any other type of generation at all. You can develop large gas plants without having to show community support, for example. So really, it seems odd that this one technology should be singled out, whilst we've got that kind of evidence also that there is public support, and the Bayes attitudes tracker shows support over 70% for onshore winds. So it's just an unnecessary additional test, and the industry very clearly saying we need to remove this, and why is this higher bar there? So really interested to hear from you about your thoughts on what it says, and your experiences to date of wanting to develop onshore winds, or not having the ability to do so because you haven't had areas allocated. I'm going to move to the next slide, please, Anna. So yeah, the summary is that we think the way the current consultation proposals don't unlock new onshore wind in England, and we'd like you to provide evidence as you can of your experience on how we can make the case on that point. And that's my email address if you want to send me your thoughts directly after the meeting, but really here to listen to you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Hazel. That was really useful introduction to that. I just had a very quick question about the supplementary planning document. Local authorities, and some of them have been really proactive in this, have actually allocated areas and done some work on that, and some may, I guess, hopefully be looking at doing supplementary planning guidance. Was there any more detail on why those, would they just be replaced by something else that they could do from 2024? It's not just going away. Was there any more information on that?
Yeah, it's a wider reform to the planning system. So moving into something they're calling supplementary plans overall.
Okay.
I think I've got that right. And so thanks, Duncan. So that is it's a wider reform. So we're not talking about onshore wind in that context. It's talking about an overall reform to the local planning system. And so they will be phased in from 2024, which means the ones that have SVDs, they'll continue to be valid until they have to change their local plan into the supplementary plan. So there is a transition period. So it's not like you develop a SVD tomorrow and it's automatically off in 2024. It would be valid until a time later when you had to go through this new process.
Okay, lovely. Thanks, Liz. So it's not entirely wasted effort, I guess, if people were planning to do it, hopefully. So I'm going to hand over to Catherine now, who's going to give some thoughts from the legal perspective.
Yeah. Thank you, Poppy. Catherine Tracy, I'm from Burgess Salmon. I'm a planning lawyer working in renewables, been doing that for 15 or so years. I was working on a lot of those projects in 2013, 14, before in England, certainly the industry was shut down for onshore wind. And currently I'm working on a lot of projects in Wales, where actually government policy and targets and ambition has set off something of a gold rush. And they have got in place positive national policies that facilitate wind or onshore wind and other onshore renewables, because it's more than wind. I think the consultation is an incremental step, but it by no means goes anywhere near what is needed to give the industry the confidence to bring applications forwards. We talk about there was a map up of Cornwall and its allocation in a plan, in terms of essentially we've got a climate change emergency. Really, it should be your local authorities are open for business for onshore wind. Put it wherever you like, subject to some minor constraints, I would say. And I would suggest that they're criteria-based constraints rather than lines on maps, because you look at what Wales has done, and they have taken an area-based approach. They did so with TAN 8, and they have done with their pre-assessed areas through Future Wales, which it's acknowledged that they only look at the landscape criterion, that is the landscape able to accommodate turbines, which is all well and good. But when actually you get developers going out and looking at these sites and then overlaying aviation constraints, telecommunications, ecological constraints, hydrogeology, all the others, you end up residential buffers with an area about this big that can be developed in a pre-assessed area. But just outside the pre-assessed area, there's this great space, and actually the landscape doesn't differ drastically between X and Y. Commercial developers will spend the money doing that. They will find the best, most appropriate sites with the least impacts. Not saying that there won't be impacts, but they will do their best to minimize and mitigate. But they'll only do that if they can then put in a planning application that's actually going to go through the process and get consent. And that footnote, I think, so almost whatever you do with your plans, I would encourage you still allocate areas in your plans, but allocate your entire area and leave it to the market. Put some criteria in, think about it. Residential buffers are a good one. And there are buffers around SPAs and SACs and things like that, which developers would find anyway. But otherwise, I would say let the developers go and find those sites. But even if you do that at the moment, I think a developer will be incredibly reluctant to bring an application forwards because of this community support. And, you know, the fact they've changed backing to community support, it's the same thing. That's done nothing but change the words. The sentiment is still the same. And we've moved from fully addressed to satisfactorily addressed. Well, in the planning world, there is a planning balance to be made. Impacts, need, and that weighing has always happened for every application. But community support, what is it? We know, you know, we're 15 years down the line, or more than that, aren't we? The first wind turbines onshore went up in the early 90s, but the public are more supportive, but you will always have objectors. You will always have the people that don't want. And what does that do? Where does that balance sit? And as much as developers 15 years ago accepted that if they could finally get the local authority to determine the application, because they are politically contentious, but they're only politically contentious because we can't hide a turbine with a tree. We can see them. And that's the bit, because the impact on the ground is minimal, negligible. We're talking about, you know, loss of BMV land to solar. Turbines have such a small footprint and they are far more effective. If we are serious about meeting our climate change, the policy should just be saying, let's do it. They're temporary permissions. We'll just flag that the ones in Wales are not 25-year consents anymore. We're looking for 35 to 40-year consents. So it's a bit longer than we were 15 years ago. The turbines are bigger, they're better, they're able to generate so much more electricity. But from a planning perspective, as local authorities, I would encourage you, I think, to, when you're looking at your plans, and I know a couple of local authorities have pulled their plans based on the NPPF consultation in terms of what do we do now, but if there's any way you can be, and it's difficult politically, I know that. I've worked in local government. From the inside, it's very difficult, but planners are used to making unpopular decisions for the benefit of the community in the long term. That's what planners do, for the benefit of your communities. And so if you can get it into your local plans and we can persuade the government to get rid of the footnote and let the planning system do what it does and what it has always done, well, actually, then we should be able to revitalise the market.
Thank you, Catherine. That was very rousing. I'm really hoping. We're going to go on to Duncan now to give a sort of perspective from community energy, because as we've sort of noted, that community support is quite a critical part of what's in there at the moment.
Thanks, Poppy, and thanks everybody. That's really interesting and useful. Yes, communities are critical. The government places a lot of emphasis on locally supported renewable energy, and I would agree, properly sited and locally supported. So we need communities, and we need wind. Actually, we should be pushing at an open door. Previously, the government promised to unlock the potential of onshore wind by bringing consenting in line with other infrastructure, which was the only sensible proposal that the Truss government actually made. And this government has backtracked on it, sadly. And they've done it out of fear for the opinions of local Tories, very often local Tories in power. The problem is politicians are not great at assessing what the public actually feel. And a recent survey showed that Tory politicians underestimate support for among Tory voters for onshore wind, which stands at something like 81% of Tories would support local wind. So really, we shouldn't need to unlock the door. We should just push it because it's already 3/4 open. The result is a sort of lukewarm consultation proposal, which to me will not open up anything. Communities will not come forward because there are so many opportunities for reluctant councils to just say no. I've got a mind map here, and dotted over it are comments: uncertainty, delay, complexity, blocks, more delay. And that is not the way that you get a transformation of the energy system. the only way to do that really is to simply remove footnote 54. We need a level and fair playing field. At the moment, a diesel peaking plant can just get planning permission. We shouldn't need to designate areas. As Catherine said, the market, the developers will do that. They're the experts. We should enable them to justify their choice of site. There seem to be so many blocks put in the way. The SPD, again, puts it back in the hands of the local authority. And if the local authority is supportive, they will either block it or not bring it forward. The same with the other routes. And the subjective language, satisfactorily, appropriately, made acceptable. Satisfactory, appropriate to, acceptable to whom? If you have a planning committee that is sizably packed by people who are opposed to onshore wind, no material considerations are going to change the fact that it is unsatisfactory and unacceptable to you. And nobody is going to come forward and risk the huge upfront resources and investment that it takes to get wind, and time that it takes to get wind up and running, if they fear that a local authority is just going to turn around and say, sorry, no. So we need, because we are in a climate emergency, we need the government to open that door, and we need them to mandate all local authorities to take their share of responsibility for achieving the government's net zero targets and ambitions, taking a proportion of, according to the resources they have, a proportion of the responsibility for achieving our nationally determined contributions. They should be locally determined contributions. The Tyndall Centre has a tool which apportions it local authority by local authority, and that should be, as was said earlier, it should be in there as a requirement of local authorities, not as a thing they should be doing. I think that's enough.
Thank you, Duncan. That's really interesting. It sort of takes us into the slightly bigger question of, yes, allocations of how much generation sit where, which is yes, a bigger, wider question, but still very relevant. Thank you. So we're going to move into Q&A because we're really keen to hear from you. Before we do that, we were going to quickly ask people a Menti question. So if you have a screen, if you could log on and you go to menti.com, you put in a code 69016221. We'll try and put it in the chat because we'll have to take that down at some point. And let us know, what you think about that that footnote and whether it should just go. I'm hoping that most people on the call are going to say yes here, but I imagine there will be some people that will say no. So it's interesting to get that. We can feed that back to Delight. Lovely. So we're going to move on to the panel session now. I just quickly wanted to introduce Joseph, who I think is with us. Do you want to just quickly say hi?
Hello, just to introduce myself, I'm Joseph from the Planning Policy Division at DLUC. So obviously we're the kind of team that looks after the planning system in England, and we led on sort of this elements of the NPPF consultation that you've been looking at. We will sort of be, I think we're mainly in listening mode. We'll just be kind of here to kind of hear your views. We can't necessarily say like loads as officials, so I think it's really kind of up to you guys to kind of let us know what you think about the proposed changes. And we're very happy to kind of, I think we're sympathetic about the position that onshore wind has, and we're kind of very happy to hear your kind of views and ideas about how we might sort of make the proposed changes better, or kind of try and find a way through to make these kind of workable. I think to an extent we have to kind of take the politics of this as they are. They're kind of, it's for ministers ultimately to decide on kind of what they sort of want to see in terms of increasing deployments and so on. But we are kind of sympathetic to the fact that this will be kind of a difficult perhaps a thing to work with, and at least initially, without kind of having the tools that you need to do this effectively. So I'm very happy to kind of hear your thoughts for what tools and what those kind of tools and guidance might be.
Lovely, thank you, Joseph. So let's just put the slide up, see where we are on our Menti. See how many people have managed to. Oh, we've gone back to Q&A. Sorry. 26 yes and 3 no. So there's some people that also think that some special treatment is needed for onshore wind. So it'd be interesting to hear views on that. So just a reminder, if you would like, you can ask questions in 2 ways. You can put your hand up. So please do so if you've got any questions for Catherine, for Duncan, for Hazel, or for Joseph. And you can also put any Q&A questions in the Q&A. If you just want to make a statement, actually, that's also useful. It'd be lovely to hear sort of examples from where you are, or things that you are struggling with, if you just wanted to sort of air some of the questions or frustrations that you had. But we do have one hand up, so I'm going to go to, sorry, I don't know your name, called WCA.
Hi, yeah, it's Adam Walton from Wiltshire Climate Alliance. We're a number of environmental groups in Wiltshire. Yeah, my question really, I think, is one for Joseph, although I doubt from your preamble whether you'll answer it. I totally agree with the analysis here that the changes to the NPPF are effectively allowing a ban to continue, or at least placing very significant barriers in the way of onshore wind development. So my question really is, as you've correctly pointed out, this continues to single out onshore wind uniquely in any form of generation development, or in fact, any other type of generation, and any other type of development, that it requires substantially higher barriers to gain planning approval from anything else. So the question really is, which I'd like Joseph to address, is why should onshore wind uniquely amongst any other type of development have these higher barriers?
Do you want to try that?
Sorry, I'll come in on that. I'm not going to answer that question directly because I think that's for ministers ultimately. I think it's a political judgment call there. And I think, sorry, can I answer the question, please?
Right, I was going to ask
I'll let you come in a moment.
Yeah,
I think,
thank you.
I think the important thing to say here there is that the proposed changes that we put forward don't constitute an absolute kind of prohibition against onshore winds, in that no matter what we're saying, and I fully kind of say none of us are kind of naive, and here we kind of agree that like there is clearly not much deployment, and the evidence of that is pretty clear in terms of what is happening in practice. But there is no kind of de facto ban on onshore wind in England, from at least imposed through the planning system. I think what we're trying to do with these proposals here is to kind of recognise that there is a difference of opinion between like people that will kind of want a lot more deployment, and that's probably, if the polling evidence believe, that's kind of probably the majority of people, but ministers and the government has to kind of weigh that with potentially a very significant minority of people, and you may think that, and that's there certainly could be evidence of that, but the minority of people that still kind of have concerns about onshore winds and do kind of want there to be some kind of safeguards. And unfortunately, our position as officials, like, we can only kind of implement what kind of that kind of political consensus is, really. So I think we kind of do have to take it as read that kind of the planning policy is where it is in terms of the politics, the political kind of landscape that it's operating in. But we're very kind of keen to try and make these kind of changes work as much as possible. And I think that we're kind of, the reason why we're kind of talking to you, and we've been talking to quite a lot of people in industry and with like local authorities and community representatives as well, since the kind of prospectus proposals were published, is that we kind of do have a genuine desire to kind of make a difference in the kind of, in terms of how the proposals kind of impact on deployments. And I think you would hear like ministers say that as well. But recognizing that there is that kind of dual aim there of like while preserving local say, but also increasing deployments. So that's my kind of slightly provocative challenge back to you, but I hope that's helpful. And thanks for kind of letting me said all that out, because I think that's important to say.
Thanks, Jason.
Yeah,
just quickly. Yeah, we've got one more question.
Because actually, I probably asked the question the wrong way, because the question really is, I've never seen a straight answer to that question. I've tried asking our local MPs and stuff like that. They never actually give an answer. I think effectively you have given the answer, Joseph, which is it's a small number of politicians, Tory politicians, who don't like them. But has anyone else had a coherent argument as to why that the planning system uniquely singles out and will continue to do so with these changes onshore wind?
I think we'll leave that as a hanging question, if you don't mind, and we'll put that. And I think Kirsty had her hand up.
Hi, my name's Kirsty Lodge. So I'm a principal planner at Enzo Energy. So we're a renewable energy developer. We've secured a number of connections around the UK, and I guess one thing that I haven't heard mentioned is the grid connection point. So that really is the fundamental starting position for any renewable technology. We know in the UK that there is a deficiency in grid connections, which is holding up the delivery of renewable energy as well. But I just wanted to kind of add that into the pot, because I know Catherine mentioned it, and it's something that we're keen to avoid, is having a system whereby you have allocated areas for that reason. Because yes, okay, your landscape might be, your landscape character might be more beneficial for wind turbines there, but actually in reality, there's no grid connections, which means even if someone wanted to put a wind turbine there, they can't actually make it happen. So I just thought I'd bring in a bit of perspective from an investor developer side, because that I know we're not the only developer out there that would quite willingly start putting in wind turbine applications, but with the wording as it is, there is just no certainty from an investor developer perspective in bringing that forward. We have got great sites actually that would be perfect for wind, which we have included. If the policy was to change, then that is written in there that we could go back and try and have a look at them for wind turbine developments. But yeah, just to make that point really, and to thank all the speakers, because they've really covered all the topics from a developer perspective, which we're finding and is unfortunately holding us up and bringing them forward.
Thanks, Kirsty. I might ask a question sort of to Catherine. So the Cornwall approach to, basically saying everywhere is fine as long as, there's the sort of, residential buffers and things like that. And then the criteria, which we sort of have anyway, don't we, through planning, sort of environmental impact, etc. Is there examples of that being done anywhere else that's successful? Do you know, maybe that's a question for Joseph, was there any consideration of removing that need to allocate an area because of, or is that a slightly different way of doing it?
I think it's inherent when you have a map that you want to draw a line on it when you're thinking about allocation of areas. And when you look at how local plans are drawn up, housing is lines on maps. And so I just think it's probably just a mindset, but actually it doesn't work for onshore renewables. I think question whether it works for housing, but that is town planning when you're looking at it. And I just think because of the amount of constraints that are involved, with any development, but particularly with onshore wind, because of the height of these things, you stray into lighting and CAA and visual, but also you've got all the hydrogeology and geology considerations and archaeology, cultural heritage. So when you start adding all the constraints onto maps, go look at some of the DNS applications, their environmental statements, and you look at their constraints maps in their environmental statements, and the sites are heavily constrained. So when you start saying, you're okay in this area, but by the way, as the local authority, the amount of resource it takes is astronomical. 2 years worth of surveys. So, these things, onshore wind's the quickest and cheapest to put up for the maximum energy generation. But there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes before you put that application in. And you can't you can't have unacceptable impacts. And so there's lots of things that go into the mix. And then when you drill down into this landscape character area that can allegedly take the turbines, you discover that you've probably got a patch, that's very, very small and very, very constrained. So I think that's why I would, you don't need to put any lines on maps, and a lot of the criteria already exist. You can't disturb private water supplies. You can't have, nobody's going to put wind turbines on protected species and things like that. So residential buffers are already applied by developers. So actually most of these criteria already exist. But if there's anything, and that's why really, that's the way to go, is to say in your local plan, if you think 800 meters is too close to a dwelling and you want it to be a kilometre, tell a developer, we want it to be a kilometre. This is why we want it to be a kilometre. These are the parameters we'd like you to work within, and they will go and find those sites. But except they can't bring an application forwards because what is community support?
Yeah, there's lots of, and then they can't connect to the network. But let's try and keep focused on the consultation.
The network is a bigger problem, and I do know,
put that to the side of it. Thank you, Catherine. We've got a question come from Alex.
Good morning, everybody. Alex Lockton from Bath and West Community Energy. I look after development of new projects for our community area, and we are interested in identifying wind sites and developing them. And a lot of our members are particularly keen on doing this because they're very well connected to the sort of needs of climate and everything else in our area. Given our model is based on producing community benefit, and that is our whole aim. We are not for profit. Any surplus we get is recycled back into the local community. So all the value gets put back into it. And obviously we have members who buy in and help fund the projects and help essentially make them work and essentially have an inbuilt support. Is this consultation, or are our friends who are listening today, who spoke earlier about wanting to listen today, are they looking for ideas for how we should be defining community support? Or are you basically going to be looking at other precedents and then coming back and telling us whether you've got your own preferences there? Because it seems to me that community energy projects in particular are very good at demonstrating community benefit, extremely good at it. It's hard to actually define social value better than what we do. So I'm interested in knowing what sort of special circumstances are going to be taken into consideration when we have projects coming forward from people like ourselves, and whether they'll be given any weight. So, for example, and I hate to say it, Enzo, sorry, but versus a commercial development, or any other sort of form of development, whether it's a landowner, because wind turbines should be on every single farm in the country. It should be part of the infrastructure of a farm, just as an aside on a small scale. But equally, we need a lot more power than that for the rest of the community. So we need to find sites that are bigger. So my sort of question is are you looking for us to suggest ways to define community support, or are you going to be just leaving it as broad and open as it is, which makes it very grey and difficult for planners to make decisions?
Thanks, Alex. I think I'm going to ask Hazel to come in on that, because there is another consultation that is going to talk a little bit about community benefit. But yeah, we do believe that this the community energy sector has a potentially really useful and potentially fundamental role in getting onshore wind certainly started again, because like you said, it's sort of built into your DNA, and so that might be a little bit of a shortcut to answering that question about community support. But I'll let Hazel come in on the next consultation.
Yeah, so the next consultation says it's about, so I'm reading it here, so about building local partnerships between developers, local authorities and local communities, and thinking about community benefits such as reduced energy bills. That's not word for word what it says, but here it is. In the coming months, consultation on the development of local partnerships with support communities who wish to host onshore wind in exchange for community benefits such as discounted energy bills. So that's not the broadest description of a consultation on community engagement, community benefit. but that's what the line is about it. We understand that it may be around the existing guidance on community engagement that was put out last December, but is not broadly known, is not broadly talked about that much. Yeah, we're expecting that, and we would like to also make positive responses on that around the roles of community energy, local ownership, shared ownership, community benefit, and to really pick into those. I'm going to let Duncan come in because
yes, Duncan,
the real expert here.
Duncan, you're on mute.
Should know by now. That's a really important consultation, but it feels like this current consultation is dependent on the outcome of that. So we have another delay because the outcome of that will then be debated, and then it will apparently appear in some planning practice guidance. But when? And meanwhile, we're just waiting. The other thing to say is, of course, that the way that that's couched about supportive communities in return for benefit is a kind of, it might be putting it too strongly, but it feels like those communities are being bribed into being supportive to host commercial operations. And there's a problem with that, in that could be seen as buying planning permission. We've had a problem in the past with community wind, which actually mentioned a community benefit fund in its planning application, which went all the way to the Supreme Court, which finally overturned the planning permission because it deemed that the fact that there would be money for the community had bought the planning permission. So we're in even more cleft sticks here, which is just so unhelpful. The bottom line is that the best support you're going to get from communities is when communities are involved in co-designing and co-developing and co-owning, or even owning and doing the development themselves, the resource. But that is unrealistic for the scale of development that we need. But it's just a pathway we really have to tread carefully. And, you know, the first step of any realistic development should be bringing the community on board and getting them participating.
Yeah, thank you, Duncan. Catherine had her hand up. I'd also like to go to Joseph just to warn him. It'd be good to get any insight on that process for that next consultation and how that might relate to this one. Catherine.
Just on community engagement and support, or community benefit even, I think we've moved on from where we were 15 years ago, where it was X thousand pounds per megawatt into a fund that people could dip into to fix community roofs and put LED solar lights in their property and things. The commercial developers in Wales that we're working with are really, because Wales has a very pro community ownership, community involvement. They want community support, but not just big pots of money that, quite frankly, the community struggle to spend. And I think there are many more creative ways coming about now for what the community wants, and engaging with the community to deliver it real benefit and keeping, I mean, Wales wants to keep all the money in Wales, and you can see the logic to that. Why shouldn't the region benefit if they're taking the impact? And I think we've moved on from this lots of money in a pot somewhere to much more creative ways to involve the community. And I think, you know, what Duncan's saying, that community, I think communities want to be involved. They want to shape these projects now. They want to shape the legacy that they get at the end of it. And developers are there waiting. And so I think possibly community groups, I don't think community groups are able to build at the scale and pace that we need, the climate emergency that we're in. But I definitely think they have a place to work positively with developers to ensure that their communities get real value out of things coming forwards, projects coming forwards in their area.
Thanks, Catherine. And I guess we're thinking about jobs skills, supply chain, and all those benefits that we're not seeing at the moment in England. Joseph, did you want to come in on the sort of process on the consultations? That would be helpful, and the next one.
Well, the next one, I mean, in terms of the local, what's being consulted on now is in relation to planning. So the planning system, the planning processes that we've kind of put forward in relation to what we're doing with the Levelling-up Bill and planning changes to the planning system. I think the consultation you're referring to on local partnerships is to fulfill a commitment in the energy security strategy that government published last year in the spring. So my colleagues at kind of what was BEIS until I think it was yesterday morning are leading on that consultation. So I think we'll probably have to defer to them. But I mean, I think we do know the consultation that is still kind of the stated plan, and that should be sort of coming out in the spring.
Are you listening to the? Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, it's just about the relationship between community support, the community support guidance. I think that people are sort of asking for. Are you working in partnership with
our plans to update the planning practice guidance?
Yes, and how that might feed in.
We always kind of work across governments to present as coherent everyone as possible in terms of updating their planning guidance on that. So yes, I could sort of offer that assurance now. And I think the point of us kind of coming along and kind of listening to these points today as part of that is part of our kind of attempt to make sure that we kind of factor in your views into producing that guidance as much as possible. Inevitably, kind of the role of planners and local planning authorities in this is to try and balance all these different competing views and to kind of make sure that local planning authorities have the tools that they need to kind of be able to make these kind of decisions. I think if I might offer another kind of provocative but helpful point here is that I don't necessarily think the exact wording of what the policy says. I think it's helpful to an extent, and obviously like us kind of shifting the exact balance is helpful. I think that there can be a difference between words like satisfactorily and fully addressing planning impacts, for instance. But ultimately what matters in practice is the kind of the real world's outcomes in terms of how that policy is applied and how we help local authorities to do that. And so I think we need to kind of be quite constructive here and focus on that. And that's what I'm sort of looking to hear from you guys, I think, in this session today. But I also just wanted to pick up a point I think Alex made about the community energy projects. I think was very helpful. And I think there is potentially scope for that. And I think we'd be very happy to pick up with you offline if there is if you do have ideas about how community-owned energy projects might be kind of feed into that community supports package.
Great, that would be really interesting, Joseph. So I'm sure other communities would also have views as well. So we might pick up with you offline about how they could feed that in. Would you like? Anyway, because I'm aware we're at 12 and I haven't even got to the second load of Menti questions. So I'm afraid we might have to just leave those. But so a reminder before you go. So thank you, all speakers. I'm really. I know a lot more even after this. So we hope we've achieved our objectives of encouraging everyone to have the knowledge to respond to the consultation, put in their own thoughts, ideas, experiences. The consultation ends on the 1st of March, I believe. So you've got a couple of weeks to get that together. The briefing note we've sent out gives some more information, details, links, the sort of forms that you need to be filling out. So we'll send that around at the end. Duncan, was this a quick,
very
one?
quick?
I have to let people go.
Yeah, I put in the chat a link to our consultations page, which has a link to our draft submission for people to go and steal from, be inspired by, contradict, add stuff to, or sign. Brilliant.
Thank you, Duncan. I'm not sure we've got time for Charmaine. Sorry, Charmaine. Was it a very quick point? Okay, no. Okay, thank you very much for coming, everybody, and thank you to our panel and speakers and to Joseph for coming in from Dulac. And we look forward to seeing a huge flood of responses giving constructive and useful feedback.